I caught the smell. The stench of cheating stuck right on the passenger seat. My husband, George, thought I'd cry, maybe beg. He didn't see what I slipped into the glove compartment. The secret that sent him home shaking with shame. But what I did next silenced him and his mistress. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Before we continue, please like this video and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I want to know how far our reports reach. Thank you. You know how it is, the little things. We lived in that kind of perfect Connecticut suburb where everything is tidy, green, and expensive. I'm Marianne Cole, 43, and I was supposed to be the pillar of domestic stability, the perfect corporate wife to Jonathan Cole, 45, the rising executive. I handled Caleb and Lily's schedules, the house, the charity boards. Jonathan handled the money and the ego. It was a trade-off, really. And he thought that made me blind. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Jonathan had called, claiming he needed a last-minute car wash detail because of road grime. Typical executive nonsense. I needed to run to Whole Foods, and since my SUV was blocked in by the landscaping truck, I grabbed the keys to his meticulously clean Mercedes S-Class. That's when it hit me. It wasn't road grime I smelled. It was perfume. Not my perfume, definitely not. Mine is subtle, a quiet blend of fig and cedar. This was a floral assault. Something sweet, cheap, and trying too hard. It hung in the air like a neon sign flashing infidelity. I sat there for a good minute, the ignition silent, just inhaling the evidence. It was absolutely sickening. The first instinct, the one they write about in novels, should have been to scream, to call him, to dissolve into tears right there in the driveway. But I didn't. I felt nothing but a cold, hard clarity that surprised even me. It was like I was watching a documentary about someone else's life, and the plot twist was finally revealed. Of course he was cheating. Jonathan had been emotionally checked out for nearly a year, replacing intimacy with increasingly expensive gifts and condescending praise for my organization skills. He thought a new diamond pendant bought him a hall pass. My fingers traced the console. Underneath a stray receipt from a gas station far outside his usual route, I found it, a small, crumpled tissue. It had a faint, iridescent pink smear on it. Lipstick. Not the matte beige I wear. It was aggressive, glossy, and very, very young. At that moment, any confusion, any doubt evaporated. The man I had built a life with, the man who was supposed to be my partner, was a cliché. He was cheating, and he was sloppy. And that sloppiness, that sheer arrogance that assumed I was too busy raising his kids and managing his life to notice a foreign scent in his car, was his gravest mistake. I looked down at my hands on the steering wheel, hands that had wiped tears, signed mortgages, and planned every milestone for the past 2 decades. They weren't shaking. They were steady. The rage I felt wasn't hot. It was surgical. It was the kind of cold anger that asks, how do I maximize damage with minimum effort? I knew Jonathan's weakness wasn't love or desire. It was reputation. He lived and breathed the success narrative. He was the guy who drove the S-Class, the guy who commanded the boardroom, the man who was the envy of the golf club. Humiliation would be 1,000,000 times worse than divorce papers. It would destroy the very thing he worshipped, his image. And then I remembered his calendar. The big one. The presentation he'd been prepping for, the one he claimed would seal a major merger and secure his promotion. It was scheduled for the end of the week downtown with Mr. Grant, the CEO, and a room full of important clients watching. I smiled, a small, tight, satisfied smile. Jonathan Cole thought he was smart. He thought he was playing the field. He forgot that sometimes the most dangerous player is the one sitting silently on the sidelines, waiting for the right moment to make a move. I put the car in reverse, backing out of the driveway. I was still going to get those organic avocados, but my mission had fundamentally changed. This wasn't about finding a better life. This was about executing a calculated termination. I returned the car later that day, kissed him on the cheek, a dry, meaningless peck, and made sure to comment on how fresh the car smelled after the wash. The lie didn't even catch in my throat. The next 3 days were the most exhausting period of acting I've ever had to endure. I earned an Oscar, honestly. I had to continue being Marianne Cole, the supportive wife. I cooked dinner for Jonathan, helped Lily with her geometry, and drove Caleb to soccer practice. All the while, the scent of that cheap floral perfume was a phantom, a little trigger that kept the ice in my veins from melting. Jonathan, meanwhile, was oblivious but guilty. He was jumpy, irritable, and overly solicitous, which was worse than his usual neglect. He'd ask, "Are you all right, dear? You seem quiet." I'd just reply, "Just planning the spring garden, darling." You know how focused I get. He ate it up. He liked my focus when it was directed at things he considered unimportant. But my focus was elsewhere. My gardening involved meticulously tracking his movements. I didn't need a private investigator. He was an idiot who used Apple Pay. I cross-referenced the mileage on his car with his office parking garage bills. I checked the credit card statement, which suddenly featured several suspicious lunch receipts for two at trendy spots far from his office. He tried to hide the statements by leaving them in his work satchel, but I had access to everything. I knew his password for every account. They were all based on his first big corporate win. Predictable, vain, and utterly pathetic. My true goal wasn't just exposing the affair. It was identifying the player and the venue. The mistress had to be exposed in a way that reflected badly on his judgment. And the venue had to be professional. Jonathan's real weakness wasn't his marriage. It was his pride. Late one night, while Jonathan was asleep or pretending to be, I was sitting at the kitchen island, drinking my third cup of tea. I had a torn receipt in front of me, partially shredded but still legible. It was from a boutique jewelry store. "Happy birthday, Amber." XOXO. Amber Lewis. The name just slid right off the receipt. A quick dive onto LinkedIn confirmed it. She was listed as an associate strategist at his firm. 26. Blonde. Aggressively enthusiastic in her profile photo. Exactly the kind of validation Jonathan needed to feel young and powerful. It wasn't about love. It was about boosting his fragile, middle-aged male ego. That's when I realized the true genius of my plan. If I just exposed him to me, he'd deny it, spin it, and punish me emotionally. But if I exposed him to Mr. Grant, the CEO, and the board, he wouldn't just lose a wife. He'd lose the very identity he had spent 2 decades building. He'd lose the ability to provide the life he had bought me and our children, Caleb and Lily. The next morning, Jonathan was radiating stress about his Friday presentation. "It's massive, Marianne. The biggest one yet. If I land this, we're set for life." "I know, dear," I said, handing him his perfectly ironed shirt. "Just focus on the details. You wouldn't want to overlook anything important, would you?" He laughed, a short, nervous bark. "Me? Overlook a detail? Never." I watched him walk out the door, thinking, "That's where you're wrong, Jonathan. You already overlooked the most important detail, me." The game was on, and I had just identified my target, his precious, flawless reputation. I had the name, I had the timeline, and now I needed the weapon. The first step in any good plan is selecting the right tool for the job. Jonathan was a high-tech corporate shark. He communicated in encrypted texts and closed-door meetings. To truly hurt him, I needed to go analog. Something tactile, undeniable, and utterly humiliating. A simple text message would have been deleted. A phone call would have been denied. I needed a ghost in his machine, a physical piece of evidence that would detonate at the precise moment of his biggest professional vulnerability. My weapon of choice, a photograph. I returned to Amber Lewis's social media profiles. She wasn't hard to find. Amber, bless her youthful narcissism, documented everything. It took me less than 10 minutes of scrolling through tagged photos from a team-building retreat a few months prior to find it. It was glorious. The picture wasn't scandalous in a private way, but disastrous in a professional one. It was a group shot, but off to the side, there was a mirror reflecting a small, private moment. Jonathan, looking completely smitten and unprofessional, with Amber perched on his knee, her arm slung casually around his neck. She was holding a cocktail. He was grinning like a teenager who'd just stolen a candy bar. The background was clearly a hotel suite, not a conference room. It completely shredded his carefully cultivated image of the sober, disciplined executive. I downloaded the image, edited the contrast slightly to ensure maximum clarity, and then printed it on high-quality, glossy photo paper. I needed it to look like a keepsake, Something important. Next came the message. This was where the acid humor came in. I couldn't just write, "I know." That was too melodramatic. It had to hit him personally while maintaining the veneer of cold, calculated contempt. I took a black marker, a Sharpie for maximum effect, and on the back of the photo, I wrote a neat cursive. "Hope this presentation is better than your lies." Was the perfect touch. It confirmed it was me, Marianne, but it was so curt, so dismissive. It put the betrayal on the same level as a missed appointment or a poorly balanced ledger. I folded the photo once, sharply, so it would sit neatly inside an envelope or, in this case, nestled inside his paperwork. The key was the placement. It couldn't be in his briefcase, he'd see it packing. It couldn't be in his jacket pocket, he'd find it changing. It had to be inside the presentation materials. Jonathan was obsessed with the final stack. He would print dozens of copies for the clients, but he always had his master copy, the one with his personal notes, the one he would flip through nervously right before taking the stage. That was the sweet spot. I spent the rest of the evening listening to him pace the study, rehearsing his lines about synergy and leveraging market potential. I pictured him, utterly focused on his professional performance, completely blind to the bomb I was about to drop into his script. I knew he would be finalizing the printouts late tomorrow night. My job now was to maintain the facade, keep the house quiet, and wait for my window of opportunity. He thought he was playing a high-stakes corporate game. He didn't realize I had already picked up the chessboard, and I was about to use it to smash his smug little life. I placed the folded photo inside a small, sealed envelope and hid it under my jewelry box. The weapon was loaded. Thursday night. The atmosphere in the house was thick with Jonathan's anxiety. He was running on pure adrenaline and narcissism, fueled by takeout sushi and endless cups of coffee. Caleb and Lily were thankfully at a sleepover, leaving the house unnervingly quiet, which was exactly what I needed. Jonathan was locked in the study until almost 11, making sure every slide was perfectly aligned and every footnote was accounted for. He had printed his master presentation stack, a hefty pile of glossy paper, and placed it meticulously inside his expensive Italian leather presentation folder. The folder, which I had gifted him on our 10th anniversary, lay like a resting viper on his desk. My window opened at 11:15 p.m., signaled by the hiss of the master bathroom shower turning on. Jonathan always took exactly 30 minutes to prepare for bed, hot shower, expensive lotion ritual, the whole self-care routine. It was predictable. Predictability, I realized, was the bedrock of his downfall. I moved silently. I wasn't sneaking. I was simply moving with the efficient grace of a woman who has spent 2 decades preventing teenagers from waking up and dogs from chewing up furniture. I glided into the study. The scent of sandalwood from his expensive cologne was already mingling with the fresh ink from the printer. I approached the desk. The leather folder was slightly ajar. My hands, still steady, reached inside. I pulled out the thick stack of papers, the culmination of months of his work, his pride, his future. I carefully located the third page from the top, a section titled Ethical Considerations and Stakeholder Trust. Oh, the irony. I retrieved the photograph, the one with Amber, from its hiding spot. I gently slid it into the middle of the stack, folding the paper around it just slightly so it settled perfectly, creating a barely perceptible bump. It was nestled right where he would instinctively grip the paper before handing it over or placing it on the podium. It wouldn't fall out unless the papers were violently displaced. I replaced the stack exactly as I found it inside the Italian leather folder. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of his professional ambition. It smelled like dust now. I stood there for a moment, looking at the folder. It was done. The mechanism was armed. The bomb was primed for detonation. There was no going back, and I felt a thrilling, terrifying sense of power. Jonathan was about to walk into a corporate firing squad, and I was the one who handed him the rifle. When Jonathan emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a fluffy white towel, I was already back in bed, reading a book, perfectly composed. Still awake, he mumbled, his voice thick with exhaustion. Just reading up on the market, dear. I lied, not even looking up. You sound stressed. Get some rest. Big day tomorrow. He sighed, satisfied that I was being the perfect supportive wife, completely missing the subtext. Thanks, Marianne. I'll need a perfect start to the day. Everything has to go perfectly. I'll make sure of it, I promised. He crawled into bed, his back to me. The tension was suffocating. I lay awake, replaying the scene in my mind. The smooth leather, the brittle photo paper, the silence of the house. I had planted the seed. All that was left was to wait for the bloom of humiliation. The presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m. I set my mental alarm. Friday morning was theater. Jonathan was a frantic ball of self-importance. He checked his tie 3 times, practiced his power stance in the mirror, and lectured me about the importance of silence during his important calls. I need absolute silence today, Marianne. This is a multi-million-dollar deal. No interruptions, he instructed, his eyes glazed over with ambition. Of course, darling, I replied, handing him a perfectly toasted bagel and his favorite cup of coffee. I made sure his suit was spotless, his briefcase was packed, and the leather presentation folder, my little viper, was right on top. I was playing the role of the devoted helpmeet to perfection. He kissed me quickly, a glancing blow on the cheek, and rushed out the door at 7:30 a.m. I watched the Mercedes disappear down the street, clutching my mug. It was the last time I would see him walk out feeling like the invincible man he thought he was. The waiting was the hardest part. The silent hours stretched, filled only with the domestic hum of the washing machine and the occasional bark from the neighbor's dog. I tried to focus, but the image of that folded photo sitting patiently inside his critical paperwork was looping in my mind. 10 a.m. The presentation begins. I imagined the vast, polished boardroom, the solemn faces of the clients, the looming figure of Mr. Grant, the CEO, sitting in judgment. I pictured Jonathan, sweating slightly under the bright lights, his voice booming with forced confidence. 10:15 a.m. He's probably fumbling through the introduction, finding his rhythm. 10:30 a.m. He reaches the critical section. Ethical considerations and stakeholder trust. This is where he'll grab the stack of papers to reference a chart. My palms were sweating now, despite the air conditioning. 10:45 a.m. Nothing. Time stood still. I decided to clean the garage. Physical labor was the only thing that could distract me from the ticking clock. Then, at precisely 11:02 a.m., my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text message from Diana. Diana is an old friend, a former colleague from my days in finance, who now worked several floors down from Jonathan's office. It was a huge risk, but I had confided in Diana about the general tension, and she was my eyes and ears. The message was cryptic, but electrifying. Diana, Marianne, what Jonathan just did. Is this real? It's unbelievable. My heart didn't race. It just seized up with a triumphant joy. The bomb had detonated. I dropped the garden shears on the concrete floor. Me, what happened, Diana? Diana, I can't text this, but it's bad. Like, fire him right now bad. Did you see the news? The news? No, but I knew exactly what had happened. I knew the scene unfolding downtown, the crimson flush of shame spreading across Jonathan's face, the sudden, paralyzing silence of the room. The cold, calculated revenge had worked. I didn't need to know the details yet. Jonathan was ruined. I felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and pure. The executive tumble was officially in progress. I had to know how Mr. Grant had reacted. The wait was unbearable. I didn't wait long. I immediately called Diana. She answered on the first ring, her voice a breathless, excited whisper, the kind of tone only reserved for truly spectacular corporate disasters. Marianne, oh my God. I don't know how to tell you this. Everyone is talking about it, she started. Just tell me what happened, Diana. Step by step, I commanded, my voice flat, professional, masking the wild satisfaction I felt. Diana explained the scene. Jonathan was 20 minutes into his presentation. Everything was going smoothly, too smoothly. He had just finished a key section and, in a moment of nervousness or perhaps just clumsiness, he went to grab the master copy of his presentation to turn to a crucial data visualization. He fumbled. The entire stack of glossy papers slipped from his grip, fluttering down like oversized confetti onto the boardroom floor. The room, she said, went silent. And then the worst possible thing happened. Mr. Grant, the CEO, a man renowned for his rigid moral code and his obsession with corporate family values, knelt down to help him pick up the mess. The photograph, my little masterpiece, was sitting right on top of the pile that Mr. Grant picked up. He looked at the picture first, Diana whispered into the phone. He didn't react immediately. He just stared at Amber Lewis and Jonathan sitting like teenagers. Then she said, Mr. Grant flipped it over and saw my handwriting. Hope this presentation is better than your lies. Diana recounted the exact moment. Mr. Grant stood up slowly, the photo clutched in his hand. Jonathan, still red-faced from the papers falling, looked up at his boss. Mr. Grant cleared his throat, not even looking at Jonathan, but scanning the room of bewildered clients and executives. Mr. Cole, he said, his voice ice-cold. I am not sure what this refers to or what presentation she is referencing, but if this is an example of the kind of attention to detail and personal discipline we can expect, I have severe concerns about your capacity to handle a merger of this magnitude. He then held up the photo, briefly flashing it to the room. The sight of their 45-year-old, married, family man executive with a 20-something intern on his lap, a photo clearly taken outside of any professional context, was enough. The clients shifted uncomfortably. The other executives looked away. Jonathan was frozen. He didn't even have to say the word cheating. The implication of gross professional misconduct and scandalous distraction was enough. Diana said Jonathan tried to stutter out an explanation, something about bad Photoshop. But Mr. Grant simply cut him off. I think that's quite enough, Jonathan. We can reconvene this discussion when you've managed to clean up your personal affairs. Get out of my boardroom. The humiliation was complete. He was not only exposed as a cheating husband, but he was publicly dressed down and thrown out by the CEO in front of his peers and clients. He had failed in his most sacred arena, the pursuit of power. I hung up the phone, leaning against the cold wall of the garage. The rage was gone, replaced by a profound, chilling satisfaction. Jonathan Cole, the man who thought he was untouchable, was brought low by a crumpled tissue and a perfectly placed photocopy. It wasn't drama, it was strategy, and I had won the opening skirmish. Now, I waited for the wounded animal to come home. He returned at 6:45 p.m. Not in his pristine Mercedes, but in an Uber. That small detail, the loss of his driver, the lack of his usual corporate transportation, was almost as satisfying as the main event. The front door slammed with a violence that made the crystal glasses in the dining room cabinet rattle. He looked like a ghost. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie was loose and crooked, and his face was the color of old ash. The expensive executive facade had utterly crumbled, leaving behind a terrified, defeated man. Shame was a physical shroud around him. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. That was the most terrifying part. He walked past me in the hallway. I was arranging flowers, of course, the picture of domestic tranquility, and went straight to the kitchen. You, he croaked, his voice thick with a mixture of disbelief and fury. I turned slowly, a half-smile on my face. I was sipping a glass of chilled Sauvignon Blanc, looking utterly serene in a cashmere sweater. Hello, Jonathan. Rough day. He threw the crumpled, folded photo onto the granite counter. It landed with a soft thud. Don't play coy, Marianne. I know it was you. You ruined me. You just cost me the merger, my promotion, possibly my entire career. Why would you do that? I placed my wine glass down with deliberate calm. You sound confused, dear. Ruined you? I didn't do anything but make sure your papers were organized for your big day. Did you drop something? The note, Marianne. Hope this presentation is better than your lies. It's your handwriting. I walked over and picked up the photo, examining the back with faux curiosity. Oh, my handwriting? I write grocery lists, Jonathan. I sign permission slips for Lily and Caleb. You have no proof this is my note, or that I put it there. Unless, of course, you're admitting that the photo is real and the lies are about your infidelity. He paced the kitchen like a caged tiger. The perfume. You smelled the perfume. That's why you did it. Perfume. I raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. I drive your car once in a blue moon, Jonathan. Maybe you need to stop picking up your dry cleaning from that tacky place with the strong air freshener. I delivered the final, crushing blow. the one that broke his spirit completely. I walked to the trash can and pulled out the crumpled lipstick-stained tissue from my initial discovery. I had saved it, just for this moment. You want proof? Here's proof, Jonathan. Proof that you were sloppy. Proof that you chose to risk everything we built for a few hours with Amber Lewis and her cheap, sweet floral scent. You planted the bomb, dear. I just happened to be standing by when it went off. I dropped the tissue back into the bin. You don't get to blame me for your career imploding because you can't keep your fly zipped and your console clean. Your reputation was destroyed by your own lack of discipline, not by my choice of stationery. He stared at me, defeated. He had nothing. He couldn't go to the police for what? A note in his own briefcase? He couldn't go to Mr. Grant and claim I had sabotaged him without confirming the underlying truth of the affair. He was trapped in a web of his own making, and I was the spider, sipping my wine. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and deadly. He knew I had beaten him, not with emotion, but with pure, cold strategy. He finally turned and walked out of the kitchen. His shoulders slumped. The great Jonathan Cole had been reduced to a pathetic shadow, a casualty of his own arrogance. The fallout was immediate and wonderfully contained. Jonathan was officially put on indefinite leave, which everyone knew meant he was fired, but without the messy paperwork. He spent his days holed up in the study, making frantic, useless phone calls, trying to salvage his dignity with former contacts who suddenly became very busy. The suburb, of course, went wild. Neighbors and friends had a field day. Suddenly, my calendar was full of spontaneous coffee invitations and concerned phone calls. I played the role of the dignified, betrayed wife to perfection. I never confirmed anything. I didn't have to. I just lowered my voice, sighed dramatically, and said things like, "It's just devastating when you realize the person you married wasn't who you thought they were," or "I'm focusing on Caleb and Lily right now." I was the martyr, the survivor. Jonathan, the arrogant executive, was the villain. The irony was delicious. The social capital he had spent years accumulating, the boat club membership, the charity committee seats, the smug superiority he held over the other husbands, all evaporated. People weren't just avoiding him. They were pitying me, and that attention was the currency I needed now. His public disgrace was a more effective punishment than any private argument could have been. A verbal fight would have ended with him manipulating me into feeling guilty. This ended with him being universally shunned. It hit him where it truly hurt, his social standing. I also received news about Amber Lewis. Diana reported that she, too, was quietly let go, an unfortunate termination due to corporate restructuring. It was clean, quiet, and absolutely satisfying. She had been foolish enough to trust Jonathan's promises. Now she paid the price by losing her job and being branded as the homewrecker in the small, incestuous world of their corporate circle. Her humiliation was merely collateral damage, but a necessary piece of the puzzle. Jonathan began to spend his days drinking expensive scotch and watching cable news in the basement. He didn't rage at me anymore. He was too crushed. He'd look at me sometimes, his eyes filled with a mixture of hate and grudging respect. He knew he was dealing with an entirely different person, someone he had underestimated for 2 decades. This period was essential. It allowed the scandal to fully set in, cementing his villain status in the community and strengthening my position as the innocent victim. It also gave me the time I needed to plan the final step, the legal separation. The revenge was complete, but the divorce, the securing of my future and that of Caleb and Lily, was the true prize. I started making calls, very discreetly. I needed an attorney who was sharp, professional, and understood the concept of leveraging public perception. I needed to move from revenge to acquisition. I was no longer playing to expose him. I was playing to take his assets. I found a name recommended by a friend, Mr. Feldman, a man who specialized in divorces involving high-net-worth executives with reputation management issues. I knew I needed to act fast, before Jonathan could recover enough to consult his own lawyers and try to spin the narrative back in his favor. I was ready for the checkmate. Sitting in the immaculate office of Mr. Feldman, I felt a profound sense of closure. The room smelled of polished mahogany and quiet money, a far cry from the cheap floral scent that started this whole mess. "You understand, Mrs. Cole?" Mr. Feldman said, steepling his fingers, that your actions, while perhaps emotionally understandable, could complicate matters. I understand, Mr. Feldman, I replied smoothly. But as you can see, they didn't. They simply clarified matters. Jonathan's professional misconduct, his gross failure of judgment, and the subsequent public scandal have already established a negative baseline for his reputation. We aren't arguing morality. We're arguing fitness and stability. This chapter was about reflection, the shift from rage to strategy. I realized that my marriage to Jonathan had ceased being a partnership years ago. It had become a corporate structure. He was the majority shareholder, and I was the chief operating officer of the domestic division. The affair wasn't a crime of passion. It was a breach of contract, a violation of the stability I had ensured for Caleb and Lily. I reflected on the years I had spent enabling his success. I had been the silent force, the one who managed the home so he could focus on the office. He viewed me as a pleasant accessory, necessary but intellectually inferior. That was his fatal flaw. He thought I was playing checkers, making simple, predictable moves across a flat board. He never realized I was maneuvering 3 steps ahead, playing chess. The affair was his sloppy move with a pawn. My move, the photo and the note, was the swift, strategic repositioning of the queen. The key, I explained to Mr. Feldman, is that he viewed the family as an asset. He can't claim full ownership of the assets when his own actions devalued them publicly. I want the house, I want the stability for the children, and I want enough of his portfolio to ensure I never have to worry about Jonathan Cole's judgment again. Mr. Feldman smiled, a dry, approving expression. You are very clear on your objectives, Mrs. Cole. I learned from the best, I said, thinking of Jonathan's relentless pursuit of market share. I just applied his rules to his own life. I used the time waiting for the initial hearing to prepare myself emotionally. I didn't hate him. I was simply finished with him. The act of revenge had cleansed the emotional slate. I had transformed the raw pain of betrayal into focused action. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of the fallout. The divorce itself wasn't about spite. It was about ensuring the future. I was securing the environment for Caleb and Lily and establishing my own independence. Jonathan had thought he was holding all the cards, the provider, the big earner. But I had proven that control is not about what you earn, but what you know, and how willing you are to use it. The final meeting with Jonathan was scheduled. It wouldn't be a dramatic confrontation. It would be the presentation he should have given. Clean, decisive, and focused on the bottom line. I looked forward to it with a calm I hadn't felt in years. The endgame was here. The final meeting took place not in our home, but in the sterile, neutral territory of Mr. Feldman's conference room. Jonathan was there with his own nervous-looking lawyer, someone less experienced and, I suspected, less informed about the full extent of the scandal. Jonathan, despite everything, still tried to retain control. He attempted to use his old tactics, condescension mixed with feigned remorse. Marianne, he started, leaning across the polished table, this has all been a terrible misunderstanding. I've been under a lot of pressure. The entire disproportionate reaction you had. It was unnecessary. We can still save this. Think of Caleb and Lily. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. I looked him straight in the eye. My voice as level and cool as the glass of water in front of me. I am thinking of Caleb and Lily, Jonathan. That's why I am here. Your misunderstanding cost you your job, your professional reputation, and nearly cost us our financial stability. My reaction secured both. I let Mr. Feldman take over. He laid out the terms, meticulously detailing the evidence. The documented public scandal which highlighted Jonathan's questionable judgment to the court, the clear history of emotional neglect, and my own comprehensive financial records that showed my consistent management of the household assets. Jonathan scoffed at the settlement terms, which were heavily weighted in my favor, ensuring the kids stayed in the house and giving me a generous, immediate split of his liquid assets. This is ridiculous. Jonathan exploded, finally shedding his thin veneer of control. She sabotaged me. She set this whole thing up. I won't agree to this, Marianne. I leaned forward then, taking the stage one last time. You want to go to court, Jonathan? Fine. We'll present the evidence of the photo, the note, and the subsequent testimony from Mr. Grant about your lack of professionalism will show the court exactly why the CEO of a Fortune 500 company publicly fired you. You think your little fling with Amber Lewis was just a private mistake? It became public record thanks to your lack of discipline. His face went pale. He knew I had him. A public court battle would simply re-expose his scandal and guarantee his career was permanently dead. He slumped back in his chair, defeated. He finally understood. I hadn't sought petty revenge. I had manufactured leverage. I had turned his infidelity into a legal advantage. He signed the papers eventually, his hand shaking slightly as he penned his name beneath mine. The executive, the king of the suburb, had capitulated. He looked up at me one last time, a pathetic glare in his eyes. You played dirty, Marianne, he accused, his voice barely a whisper. I just smiled, a genuine calm smile this time, and stood up. I had won the house, the money, and most importantly, my self-respect. He looked defeated. He thought I was a fool. I just forgot to tell him I learned how to play the game exactly like him. And I won the game.